So what do we make of it, and how do we use it in our daily lives, and how can we think of it politically? I know it's kind of a kind of broad topic there.
Yeah, well, it's a good topic. I South Africa is not known for its low crime rates. Let me start with that point. Um, we have a lot of crime here. When I was overseas, I went to Cambodia a few years ago. I was talking to one of the guys that was there. He was a British guy. We ended up becoming pretty good friends. And he said, when you're walking in the street, he was talking to a group of us. So when you're walking in the street, just keep and don't worry, I'm coming back to your question. Just keep an eye on your wallet. Keep an eye on your belongings. Don't be too relaxed. And we were kind of talking to each other, and then he found out I was from South Africa, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be fine. They won't get you, because every South African, every few minutes when you're walking, you tap your pants, you check car keys, phone, wallet, and it's almost second nature. And there's this almost, it's sad to say, but there's this almost unconscious paranoia that has kind of surfaced, where people have a kind of default state of assuming that if I'm not careful, I will be mugged." Now, day to day, is it that bad? No. I mean, I've never been mugged myself, and I know many people that never have. I know very few people that have actually been in those situations. But it happens. And the reason I'm telling you this is because recently in our area, in the suburb I stay, there was a big break-in. There was somebody got injured, and the community suddenly said, okay, we have to do some kind of visual policing. So the local police force, the guys who literally the top members, came to our community. There was a chat group created where we could all discuss things with each other, and it's quicker to get help via a chat group of your community than trying to get through to the police station and getting them to come out. Not to cut the police credit, not to rat on them too much. It's not always their fault. Sometimes they're just overworked. They can't get to every call. It's like an ambulance driver. You might be number 9 on the list when you call. It doesn't mean the ambulance drivers are not working. It means they have too much work. So the community came together. We had this visual policing, and I remember my wife and I went to this meeting. The police were there, and we all drove something like 50 cars through our community together. And prior to that, we all met at a local coffee shop, and we all got to know each other. And for the first time, we were really starting to get to know our neighbor. And I just said to Sinead, my wife, I was like, this feels so good. This feels so right. It feels like there's something that's been missing. And of all the problems that tragedy brings, one of the benefits it brings is unity. And so we were driving through the community. We were kind of making a kind of visual display. It was very much a ritual, right? Like, we're going to drive around. We're not like seeing crime just reduce, but we know visual policing is one of the most efficient ways to lower crime in areas, just based on times this has been done in the past. And so we're performing this ritual together as a community. We're driving together. There's a system. There's a way to do it. And now within the community, I don't feel like out there's just a bunch of strangers. There's just a bunch of nameless faces. I now know the people there in a completely different way. So to come back to your question, and this is a very small microcosmic sense of politics, but the community needs to kind of graft onto the same relationship you have within the family, that kind of knowing about one another and wanting to assist each other, obviously to varying degrees, not as intense as you would with your children, for example. But that felt to me like a manifestation of that meta pattern. It felt like the Spirit of Christ kind of bringing people together, uniting people through tragedy, through suffering. And so that's just, I think, one example that I can kind of think of right now off the top of my head, where the pattern manifested itself through our behaviors, through our actions, and that directly improved our relationships and our whole perception of the entire community. And now everybody feels safer. So that's one point. I can make maybe one additional point, unless you want to jump in before I do that.
Well, I do actually have a question. What does the community look like? Are you in a suburb? Are you in a city? Are you in more of a rural or in between?
So I'm in a city, Pretoria,
Mm-hmm.
the Jacaranda city. So there's the kind of city as a whole. South from us is the kind of main city that most foreigners have heard of, which is Johannesburg. Um, and then we're slightly north of that, Pretoria, which is still a fairly big city. And then within the city, we stay in a suburb area, which
Mm-hmm.
is, I would say, kind of middle class to upper middle class. We're staying, the property we're using, we're friends with the owner, so we can kind of afford to be here just because of the discount he's giving us. But it's a fairly
Mm-hmm.
up. It's kind of, I would say, old money, like people that have been here for a very long time, passing homes down to their children. So it's a nice community. Um, but it's
I have family, and so my wife's side of the family is from South Africa. They're from the Netherlands, but then went to South Africa, then to Canada, and then here. So I have family. My wife has family. We've met them a few times that live, I believe, in Pretoria, but Johannesburg definitely, or in between there.
okay.
And I remember them coming about maybe 10 years ago, maybe even more, and they're telling me what's been going on there, and I was like, that was the first time I've heard of what's happening in South Africa. I was like,
Mm.
so how long has it been the way that it is? Would you say? And are you from there? Are you from elsewhere that you moved there? Like, and how have you seen it over time?
So, without going into too much detail, I was born in South Africa, so I was born in Pretoria. Pretty much raised here, but at a very young age, my dad loved to travel. So we actually moved, believe it or not, to America. We stayed
Mm-hmm.
in San Diego in California, and that was where I was at that age where I was like a sponge. So I said the Pledge of Allegiance every morning at school, and I have very fond memories of my time there. But I was still very young, so it was.
How old were you?
I
How old
think
were
I,
you?
I
Would you
think
say?
I was probably about 3 when we went over, somewhere around
And
there.
for how long? And for how long were you here for?
3 to 4 years. 3 to 4
Three or four
years,
years.
yeah.
Okay.
And then we traveled again, but we kind of visited just a few places. So I was very fortunate to go around to a lot of different places. But I was honestly too young to remember it. I mean, I see photographs and I
Mm-hmm.
have no real working memory of those events, although there are some places that I do have a better memory. But yeah, so my first language is actually American English, if I could put it that way,
Mm-hmm.
which is why sometimes my accent throws people off, especially here in SA. So if South Africans sometimes think I'm an American, but
Mm-hmm.
Americans don't.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I sound like an American. And then, I'm culturally Afrikaans. So my ancestors were French Huguenots that fled France when the Edict of Nantes was revoked, and the Protestants at the time had to leave. And some of them went to different parts of the world, and some of them came to South Africa, and they went to the Cape where they started wine farms, and then a lot of
Mm-hmm.
them spread to the east. And there's always a little bit of mystery when it comes to that ancestry, as you get further back. But
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be the most likely background, just based on the surname, and if you trace it back through time. So culturally, my family were Boers. So
Mm-hmm.
culturally, I'm Afrikaans. I have Afrikaans traditions I try and keep. I speak Afrikaans fluently. But it's my second language because, again, the first language I learned was American English. But when I got back to South Africa, my aunts and my uncles weren't going to have me speaking like an American, so I had to learn, just learn, by talking to people. And it's funny. It's actually something I kind of rejected about myself a few years ago, my Afrikaans identity, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is very common. Like, you kind of rebel against the identity that you feel is kind of foisted upon you. But now it's something I love. It's something that I cherish about myself and about the country. So that's just a little bit of a background. And then to answer your question, like how have things changed? So I'm pretty young. I'm 27. So I was born in 95. So I'm in South Africa. I would be considered somebody that was born free. So I was never alive during the apartheid regime. So I
Mm-hmm.
never experienced that. I never. It's only stories. It's only history books. It's only people talking about things that have happened. And many people in my generation, obviously, it's kind of it's not something people talk about that much either. So there's a lot that's kind of been lost. Unless you deliberately go and look for the information, you won't hear it in a conversation. I wouldn't say it's completely taboo. People do talk about it, obviously, but it's not something you'd bring up casually. that whole event.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, when we came back to South Africa, things have always kind of been, in terms of crime and in terms of problems within the country, they've always kind of been prevalent. I mean, I don't really remember a time, and another South African might have had a different experience, but I don't really remember a time where things were just, completely peachy. Although I don't think that's true for any country at any time, right? But I think things have definitely, in many ways, gotten worse, unfortunately. Unemployment is worse. Crime seems to be getting worse, although at certain points, certain types of crime do go down. Of course, there are certain points where the GDP does improve, things do get better in some ways, but sometimes it can feel like, one step forward, two steps back, if I could put it that way. Right now in the country, we're having a big problem with our electrical system. Our national power grid is the company that's responsible for that is going through a lot of trouble. Everything, without getting into too much detail, I mean, just a mix of mismanagement and corruption seems to be the order of the day and the order of the last, 50,000 days or however long it's been. And as a consequence of this, I mean, I do think, I think you'd rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right. So I'd rather be just optimistic and look at what's going well. And there are a lot of great things. South Africans as a people have become very hardy. We've become very resilient. I don't think people here really realize how much this is shaping our psychology. Although everybody does definitely feel it, but this kind of awareness that the government is not going to save us. That lack of reliance on government, I think, is a good thing. That realization that obviously not everybody's going to feel that crisis is the only thing that can save us, but I obviously believe that. But at least people aren't convinced, and of course there are people that are, but at least more and more people are waking up to the fact that look, there's things that a lot of us feel government should be responsible for, but there's a lot of things that we feel we could probably do better ourselves. So let's try and make it happen. And so South Africa in some ways I think is becoming one of the greenest countries, ironically, because I can't drive to work without seeing people's houses covered in solar panels. I can't drive to work without seeing billboards about completely get off the grid today, and then and pay this amount, something a big amount, something like 40,000 rand, which I'd have to convert to dollars. That amount, people are willing to pay that if it means that they're off the grid, and that's happening more and more and more. And those technologies are becoming cheaper and cheaper. So, are there problems? Yes. Should South Africans lose their optimism, their pessimism? No. Should they lose their optimism? No, never. But I think it's deeper than optimism and pessimism. I think we need to revive patriotism. Chesterton has this beautiful idea in his book Orthodoxy. If I can just go off on a brief tangent quickly.
I was just gonna real quick. Let me play something in there. I was just gonna ask you what is it like to be a South African? What is it that binds you as a community in general? And that's something that, the things that you're talking about are happening here and rapidly increasing depending on kind of where you live, right? So, and it seems like if we look at the meta pattern, right? So how can you discern when the pattern isn't functioning correctly? It's when heaven and earth aren't uniting appropriately. So heaven can be like the governors, right? The plan of how the city or the country is going to operate, right?
Yeah.
And the earth is the people that operationalize that plan. So if the crime is going up and there's challenges, that means that there's something wrong with the pattern. So, and you can point to it. So the plans, the governing tools that are being used, right? We can't keep the lights on from here and there, right? So it's easy to discern when the pattern's gone wrong. And I think the solution, and it goes to my question here, and I'll let you get back to your next point, is, So what is it what is it that binds you? Is there something like pride? Is there a pride in being South African in your community? Was there in school? Did you learn civics in school? As a broad your framing.
Yeah, so it's gonna be. I can't speak for I can't speak for any other South African other than myself, obviously. But I do think that the emphasis has always been on this idea of the rainbow nation, on the fact that diversity is a strength. And I know how many people push back against that idea these days, especially probably in the online circles that you and I are engaging in. That phrase, diversity is a strength, can can rile some feathers. But I think if you're just thinking practically, right, if I'm really good at hunting and you're really good at making fires, then the diversity of our skills is a benefit. I mean, obviously. So there is a benefit to having different perceptions and having different abilities that you can bring to the table. And there is something beautiful about, in South Africa, I'll be in a classroom with people, and collectively we've got 11 official languages. So, there's all these different cultural groups and tribes and peoples from all over the world that are interacting with each other. And I think in many ways we're ahead of a lot of countries in our kind of, I don't know if I could use the phrase race relations, if that's the correct phrase to use. Now, are there issues of racism? Of course. Show me a country where there aren't, right? But I think that there's we've dealt with we're dealing with so many problems now that it's almost like we don't have the luxury to always worry about that. Like we've got bigger fish to fry, if I could put it that way. So I feel like I'm digressing. I want to come back to your question. So what is the thing that really unites us? I think that it has been probably historically the desire to build a free country, the desire to build a genuinely good democratic system, which obviously people are going to, some people will say that's impossible. I would say just because of sin, it's never going to be possible to build a utopia, at least on this side of heaven. But that was the kind of goal. And we had a new flag, we have a new anthem, and our anthem actually has 4 languages in it, and each paragraph is a different language, ending in English, which is the language that unites us all. And so we can all kind of sing that language together. Although, funny enough, Afrikaans is the loudest part of the anthem because it's the vernacular of the country. Most people in South Africa speak some form of Afrikaans, interestingly. So I think it's that desire to build something genuinely free and genuinely good. But it takes a different mindset to end an oppressive system than it does to run a successful new system. So the kind of mindset of the country and the kind of zeitgeist and the ethos of we need to end this current system for all its with all its flaws, etc. That mindset might be very good and very effective at that, but we almost need to now look at the country as a whole and say, okay, well, that's happened. What can we do now to go forward more successfully? And I think in that way we've kind of lost. We've made a lot of mistakes, and it's not just the government. It's on a social level. It's on an individual one-to-one level. I could just say this briefly. It's addressing your question. If there's a pothole in the road in the street, I can report it to the municipality. They'll come out and they'll fix it. But what will often happen is, somebody will have a burst pipe in their street, and then the municipality will come and fix it. But then they'll kind of leave it. They'll leave the road kind of damaged, right? And they kind of don't finish the job. And so you could say, well, why does that happen? Why isn't the pattern functioning there? Because if they came and fixed it perfectly and then they left and okay, everything is good, then you could say, okay, things are kind of running well. But okay, the fact that my road outside is not fixed is a symptom of a bigger problem. So we go one step up in the hierarchy. And then it's like, okay, well, what's that problem? What's the cause of that problem? Well, the municipality, for whatever reason, is mismanaged or it's corrupt. It's like, okay, well, wait, what's this? What is that a symptom of? And you go again up the hierarchy, and you go on another level of control within the governmental sphere, And then you can keep going up all the way to the government itself, and you can say, okay, well, why is the government? Why does it have a problem? What's that a symptom of? And then you ultimately, eventually, just get back to the individual people, and then you find that the top of the hierarchy is always sin. I find so it's just the consequence of sin in my mind. It's actually one of the reasons I became convinced of Christianity, because every problem you see, you can trace back to the fault in our hearts.
Yeah. Sin is the distorted pattern. Sin is the pattern distorted. That's
exactly
right.
Exactly.
And I think it's interesting how you can use that. Like I didn't understand what sin meant, and you can spend your lifetime really reflecting on what that means. But it seemed like the general understanding of it was, you're born sick and ordered well, like as Christopher Hitchens would always say. And once you really get a look, so you have to care enough to look at what does sin mean, and then it's so applicable to both your individual life, right? Sin, I want to be a good father, and I want to treat my family well. You're not doing that, you're sinning, you're missing the mark. You're aiming to be a good father, and you fail sometimes, and you aim again. So it's about this reorientation, this metanoia, this aiming appropriately again, and then you're going to fall again, right? So, and I think it's interesting to view with the story that you just told there about how to kind of reflect on the root causes of what's going wrong with, the government. It's sin, right? It's sin, right? And we're going to miss the mark, and that's part of reality. It's a part of the structure reality. It's not that there's some bad people and some good. It's back into the human heart. So I think it's in your conversation with Jonathan, I've had a couple of them, and I asked them, like, why is symbolism coming into the world now? And he says a lot, if you have to talk about symbolism, there's a problem, right? If you have to start talking about the pattern is to be there and operate through our relationships and through our world and in our world. But once you have to discern the pattern to fix it again, I think that's when things get a little bit tricky. But the comforting thing is there is a pattern there, and that's mind blowing coming from more of a relativistic philosophical mindset, right? There is the right way to do things, but that right way isn't accessed as simple as rationality provides solutions to, right? In your book or your video on Job, I think it was the title said, "The riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man." And
Beautiful.
What came to me was paradoxes reveal the mystery, but they reveal it as a mystery. It doesn't get revealed and then you logically can make sense of it. The revelation of the mystery is still a mystery, right? But in doing so, it's something that it reveals a sort of supra-rationality. Right? You can call the matter pattern a sort of supra-rationality. And it's interesting to, we talk in these circles kind of philosophically, symbolically, psychoanalytically, but really it's applicable practically to your psyche, your relationships, and your community. I find that fascinating and, and something to hope for, right? And I've been thinking a lot about, as things get a little wonky here and we see it, the way we feel here in the States, and obviously I'm talking for myself, but the general vibe is there are no solutions. Like voting for someone else, if you don't believe in the system of the vote or the way that the candidates and the way that these parties, like all of a sudden you become despondent and apathetic, right? And you don't really know why. And that's why we see a lot of young people, because it's like, what do you do about it? What can you do about it? You look at, it seems hopeless. We're sending, let's say your government is sending hundreds of billions of dollars to fight a war, hypothetically somewhere, right? And you're like, I don't want to do that, but there's nothing I can do, right? Voting doesn't work, right? So I see this, I have this weird thought that the far right, the January 6th right, and the far left, Antifa, they are both intuiting the same problem from different spaces. Things are jacked up, and there needs to be some kind of radical change. So I think they're both intuiting it, and the fact that these philosophical and symbolic ideas are coming into the world now, I think it makes me the perplexed optimist that Joe was in your video, for sure.